It's the 5th day of Advent. We're getting closer and closer to the coming of Jesus. And today I'd love to show you how you can use regular run-of-the-mill Christmas books and talk about Christmas with your children. My name is Elaine Pendergrass. I specialize in children's ministry and education, and I love to help parents use everyday activities and everyday things that happen to teach their children about how to follow Jesus and how to love him better. So today, let's talk about books. Children's books are so important. I use them in the classroom when I was teaching. I use them in classrooms at church when I'm teaching children's ministry lessons, and they just can really speak to children. So there are a lot of fantastic children's books out there. There are some that are kind of sorry. You just have to use your judgment as a parent and hopefully follow Christian principles. But even if a book is secular, meaning it doesn't have a Christian meaning, there are hidden gems in some of these books that we can use with our children. And so I brought several today that I want to show you as you're reading with your children, kind of how you can use this to your advantage to teach them about the birth of Jesus and why we celebrate Christmas. So the first one I'll share with you, anyone that knows me knows I love the Grinch. And so How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Nobody thinks of this book as a Christian Christmas book, and it's not. It's about the Who's, and they're in Whoville, and they're celebrating Christmas, and they love to decorate, and it's very fun and phantasmic and all kinds of great things. And the Grinch, grumpy Grinch right here, he wants to take Christmas away. And the new movies have told us the backstory of how he was treated poorly, and there was an orphan, and all these things. But guess what? There's a very big teachable moment in this story. And it comes kind of at the end. So as you're reading this with your children, talk about it. Have fun, enjoy it, make silly faces and all of that. There's the part after the Grinch has done what he thought means stealing Christmas by taking away all the Christmas stuff, all the toys, all the food, all the everything. This is what happens. The Who's are standing around singing. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, was singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came. Somehow or other, it came. Just the same. And this is the next part. And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling. How could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags. And he puzzled 3 hours till his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more. Now, in the story, it does not go on to tell us, oh, it means more, meaning, oh, it was Jesus' birthday. It doesn't tell us that part. But guess what, parents? That opens up a door for you to say, why do we celebrate Christmas? Is it about ribbons and bows and packages and all the things that he listed? Is it about those things? And hopefully they'll say, no, what is Christmas about? Well, in this story, it doesn't tell us, but if we were going to tell the Grinch, if we had the Grinch here in our house, what would we tell him when he says, maybe it's not from a store, maybe it means more? What could we tell the Grinch? And then have your children tell the Grinch what they might say. If you even have a little Grinch stuffed animal, this would be a great opportunity for your children to explain to the Grinch why we celebrate Christmas. So that's one example, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Use it as a teachable moment to talk about why we celebrate Christmas. Here's another classic book that you could use. This is If You Take a Mouse to the Movies. It all started with If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, If You Give a Pig a Pancake. They're all of these kinds of books. They're very fun to read with, first grade, second grade kids. It's really fun. And this one happens to be a Christmas one. And this particular book goes on and on and on about you give one thing to the mouse and then he wants something else. So if you take a mouse to the movies, then he'll ask you for some popcorn. And then it turns into popcorn, and then he wants to end up making a popcorn tree, and then he thinks about trees, and he wants to go play in the snow, and it goes on and on and on about all the things that he needs, because everything connects the dots for him until the very end of the book, and says he goes back and he wants to make another something, and he'll ask you for popcorn, and if you give him popcorn, he'll want you to take him to the movie. So it starts right back at the beginning, where at first, if you give him popcorn, he wants the movie. So this book, again, doesn't say anything about the birth of Jesus at all, but this one can be a teachable moment to talk about how we don't need more and more and more and more, because oftentimes we might give our children, when I was little, we would get like the Sears or the JCPenney catalog, and we would go through and mark all the things with red pens or whatever of what we wanted. And it ended up being, lots of red in the book because we wanted everything. Or if you take your child to the store and say, choose one thing, it's very hard for them to choose one thing. Well, the same for the mouse in the story. He had one thing, and it took him to another thing, and it took him to another thing and another thing. So this is a great book. You can talk about the lesson of not being greedy, and using the things that you have already, maybe sharing with other people. Not that he was necessarily doing anything wrong, but you can remind your children if you're out and about or shopping or they're seeming to be greedy. Remember that mouse? He had to have more and more and more. And then he went back to what he originally had. And that's what he loved the most. So that's one example. Another is connecting the dots, as I mentioned earlier. Kids can begin to connect the dots. So you could connect the dots with them in the story of the birth of Jesus. You could even take a nativity scene out and start with one thing and then add to it and add to it as he began to add two things in his story as well to show them how to connect the dots. Another one of my favorites is The Polar Express. Again, this is a Christmas book that does not talk at all about the birth of Jesus. There's some really neat things in the story, but it does not talk about the birth of Jesus. So how can we incorporate the story of the birth of Jesus with this book? Well, in the book, if you remember, or even in the movie, there are some things that happen. And it begins as a little boy gets a special gift on Christmas and he loses. It begins with a little boy who doesn't know if he still believes in Santa. And so he gets taken away on this Polar Express, this train that goes to the North Pole, and he actually gets the first gift of Christmas. If you've seen the movie, it's a pretty cool scene with all the elves singing. There's even a special guest rock star singer from Aerosmith in there, and he gets a bell, and the bell rings, and it has the most beautiful sound. And when he gets home, when he gets the bell back from Santa, because he loses it, when he gets the bell back, he rings it and realizes the adults don't hear it. Because the idea is the only way that you hear this bell is if you believe that Santa is real. So once the parents have aged out and not believed in Santa anymore, then they don't hear the bell anymore. So there's a big emphasis in this book about I believe, I believe, I believe. And so in this book in particular, it's about I believe. In this book in particular, it's about I believe in Santa. Well, in our home, we didn't do Santa stuff very much. When they were very little, we did a couple of things, but when they were very little, we did a couple of Santa pictures, but we decided as parents that we chose not to do the Santa thing. We still got gifts for our kids. They still got stockings, but we didn't talk about Santa. Again, we wanted to focus on the main reason of Christmas, which is the birth of Jesus. So the whole believing in Santa, you can still do the fun stuff. We still read this book in our home. We just didn't talk about Santa the way that a lot of people do. And so anyway, in this story, it's talking about I believe. And the only way you hear the bell is if you truly believe. Well, we don't have to believe in Santa, but what we can truly believe in is Jesus. We believe that Jesus came to earth through a woman who hadn't been with her husband yet, in the way that married people are. We believe that Jesus was God the Son. We believe that he was born and put in a manger. We believe the stories that are told to us in the New Testament in Matthew and Luke about the birth of Jesus. So this story, a couple of things. One is to focus on the I believe. What do we believe about Jesus being born? The other piece is the idea that no matter how old you get, you can still believe. And so even as kids, even though some of the stories in the Bible sound kind of crazy, we know that God is true and God tells us the truth. And so the story of Jesus is true. It's historically true, it's accurate, it's real. There are real people that can be accounted for in the New Testament and the Old Testament as well. And so we can believe that. And we can use this book to talk about that too. There's another book that is similar to the Polar Express. And it's similar to the Polar Express in that there's a child in this story who sees and hears an angel, but the adults don't hear the angel. And so this story, called Alabaster Song, was written by Max Lucado. And it's a fun book because it has funny voices, because the boy in the story, the angel in the story has a lisp. And so this is one part of it. It says, one night when I was in that in-between place between being asleep and awake, I asked just one more question. He meant of the angel on top of his Christmas tree. What was it like to see Bethlehem? That must have been the right question. Suddenly, Alabaster was standing by my bed. It was wonderful. This one has beautiful illustrations. His face was round and his eyes were bright. His golden halo and white feathers glowed and sparkled. He talked to me like we were old friends, and when he spoke, he sounded like he was missing his 2 front teeth. It was a great night. We went to the Thebers because they were awake. They were so nice. Most of them like they thought they were stars. But that night, they knew something special was in the air. He giggled with a giggle that made me giggle too. By now, I was sitting on the edge of my bed. What did you do? We just sang. Yeah, I said. So this book is kind of from the perspective of the angel named Alabaster in this particular book. It's a fictional book in that we don't have a real story of a real angel that was named Alabaster, that was, all of these things, but it does focus on the story of the birth of Jesus. There are some things, of course, it talks about having feathers and halos and all the different things. We don't know exactly what those angels look like. A lot of things in the descriptors that we hear oftentimes are seen in movies are from pieces of things in the Bible or pieces of things that people have thought. And again, that's not the focus, but I like that this story focuses on the idea that the angel went to talk to the shepherds and was part of that crew. And so this is a neat way to kind of recount the story in kind of a fun way. And again, for older kids especially, you can compare and contrast. What did he say? Did that really happen? Do we know if there was an alabaster in the story? But it's still a fun way to talk about the birth of Jesus with your kids. And it's well written and it's fun to read because you will laugh and your kids will laugh as you read it with the missing teeth. There's one other book that, again, has a Christian slant. There are others, I'm sure. I just wanted to bring several today. Several that are they're all nonfiction. Several that are fiction, some that are more a little bit historical, some that are more focused on the birth of Jesus, others that are just secular and fun. But you can still talk about the birth of Jesus. So this one is called The Crippled Lamb, also by Max Lucado, the one I just showed you with Alabaster Song. And on this 5th day of Advent, this is a fun one to read. This one is about the story of a lamb, the lamb who couldn't leave when all the other lambs were going out to do their lamb thing, their sheep thing, and he had to stay back. And what happens is this family comes along that happens to have a baby coming along, and it happens to be the baby Jesus who is born, and this lamb happens to be there because he was crippled. He couldn't walk the same as the other sheep, and he was there to greet this baby Jesus and keep him warm. So, although, again, it's fictional, it doesn't talk about a specific sheep or lamb that kept Jesus warm or this crippled lamb or whatever. It's a fun way to talk about the birth of Jesus, to talk about the actual narrative, and also to say, and then this is kind of a fun way to read it. Again, it's not actually historical. That's okay. It's fun, but the point is you're talking about the birth of Jesus. It's not all about Santa and elves and all that stuff. So parents, use the books. Use books that you see in the store. Go to a bookstore, sit down and read with your kids. Use the ones you have at home. If they're secular, that's okay, but try to find something in there that you can pull out to talk about the birth of Jesus with. And if you need help with that, please put the books in the comments and I'd be happy to give you some ideas if I can come up with some. If you've had ideas that work with you with books that you've read with your children, Christmas books or non-Christmas books, I'd love to hear them too. So put those in the comments. If this video is helpful to you, please share it with your friends so they also can talk about Advent with their kids. And enjoy this 5th day of Advent.